I just happened to come across this quote on Instagram that I wanted to share with everybody because I think it's so on point to what you're saying, by Ariana Huffington. And she says, in life, the things that go wrong are often the very things that lead to other things going right. And man, ain't that the truth. Like sometimes when you're in the midst of it and everything feels like it's crashing, but usually, whether it's a week or a couple months or a year down the line, you're like, that's why that happened. And I think if we can have that lens on everything, it's just to know like, but there's a reason for the season that I'm in right now. And I think what happens with having sustainers, having recurring giving is you don't find yourself in those spots as frequently. Even if you forget, because I think sometimes we forget the power of those groups of people. Um, the promise and the goal of recurring giving is that it might be fewer, lower dollar size gifts, but in mass, and it gets you through those hard seasons. It gives you that 90 plus strong retention rate most of times, month over month, that you're not worried about a churn, and you have like a dedicated amount of funds that you know can get you through ABC.
Welcome to the Moxie podcast. We are in another month. And as you guys are very much aware, each month we have a new theme. And so I'm so excited about this month because we are specifically talking to nonprofit leaders, just thought leadership, or people in thought leadership or executive directors, but specifically who do a lot of fundraising, relationship building. And it has been a while since I've talked to you guys specifically. So we have an amazing, just lots ahead this month. And so I'm so excited to start this month with one of my favorite people, Dana. And so we met, I'm trying to think when we met. It was like 2017, 2018. I think I was hella pregnant, but I just want to
Yes.
welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you. You were not supposed to be traveling. You were in Los Angeles at the United Women Summit. And yeah, girl, you were about to pop. And I was like, how far along on you're like 38 weeks? And I was like,
Yes.
are you supposed to be traveling right now?
That's right. And I lied to the airlines that I was like 34 weeks, and they were like, you are not that. But I remember to get on. Yeah, we just had, I wasn't even supposed to be there. So this is what's so cool, I think, about our friendship is I wasn't supposed to be there. We had a hiccup with another person on my team who was also pregnant and went into labor early. So good thing she was not there. And so I showed up, and I was actually coming from Alaska at that time, not across the world, which is good, but still pretty far to get to LA.
Yes.
But then we met in a workshop, and I have loved being a part of your journey of just positive equation, because that was the beginning of it and you were starting it. And so I just want you to, I'm pretty sure you have been on my podcast before. I think.
Yes.
You have multiple times.
Repeat guest.
Repeat guests are the best. So for anyone who hasn't listened to past episodes with you, I just would love for you to introduce yourself, tell a little bit about who you are, and then kind of your journey of positive equation to kind of where it is today.
Of course. So nice to meet you, listener. My name is Dana Snyder, and I, as you mentioned, I run the podcast, Missions to Movements, and I am the founder of Positive Equation. And so I am a speaker. I am now an author, which is like wild to say, which I know we will talk about, of the Monthly Giving Mastermind. And I work with nonprofits on building and growing their monthly giving programs, so that everyone can become a philanthropist. And then I also specialize in digital marketing, specifically on helping organizations grow their email list through paid ads, through an ads challenge that I run 2 times a year. And this business, I mean, as you said, you saw it at the very beginning, has evolved so much. My background, I worked for a nonprofit straight out of college. And then I wanted to live in New York City desperately. That was like my dream. And I did the agency thing in New York for a while, working in digital marketing, and worked with some of very recognizable brands, from Sports Illustrated to The Honest Company to Delta Airlines. The list goes on, to a lot of the sports leagues. And then I wanted to take all those learnings and get back into the nonprofit sector. And that's what I did in 2017, and started my own business at the time as more of a social media agency, because that's just really what I knew from working. And then over the years, I've kind of like shifted into this role as more of the consultant, one-to-many mastermind leader, speaker, podcaster. because I really am trying to get the message out to the masses. Because I truly, truly, truly believe in this like sustainable giving model, subscription model of recurring giving.
Yeah. So let's start right there, because we have a lot to talk about that we're going to try to fit in a very tiny bit of time here. Because I just love everything you're up to, and I want to make sure our audience hears that. But I also want people to know that this month we just got off of the month of kind of talking about mid-year crisis and what that feels like, and
Mm.
to really how do we kind of push above the line to have these really more positive, like positive feelings for it. Cause sometimes, especially mid-year, like we can just feel heavy and be like, man, we're not reaching any of our goals. I just feel like giving up now. And so I'm excited that it actually is piggybacking off of that month into this one about talking about it is not too late. Like we might be in August, but it's not too late to start building relationships, to see, to see how you can push forward. And as we know, relationships take time to cultivate. I think that can be intimidating for people. I know when I first started to be building relationships, I think one of my biggest downfalls, and a lot of nonprofit leaders, right, is we're in this kind of crisis management because it's like, man, we got to raise money fast and we got to do this. And then we kind of forget the leeway to how we get money and how we continue to get
Totally.
money. And then
Yeah.
how that it's not just this one time, but it is reoccurring. So let's talk about, I would love for you, one, I want you to share anything that you want to share about like your about when you work with people, reoccurring donors, and what that looks like, because I love just seeing the case studies you do and all of that. But this is kind of a rapid fire question. What is like probably the top three things that you almost tell to every client when they're kind of entering this journey of starting to build this more subscription reoccurring donor model versus just these kind of one-time unicorns coming in and saving their
Yeah,
organization?
totally. Well, kind of like going back to what you were just saying, coming off of the month of the mid-year, I just happened to come across this quote on Instagram that I wanted to share with everybody because I think it's so on point to what you're saying, by Ariana Huffington. And she says, in life, the things that go wrong are often the very things that lead to other things going right. And man,
Mm,
ain't that the truth. Like sometimes when you're in the midst of it and everything feels like it's crashing, but usually, whether it's a week or a couple months or a year down the line, you're like, that's why that happened. And I think if we can have that
mm,
lens on everything, it's just to know like, but there's a reason for the season that I'm in right now. And I think what happens with having sustainers, having recurring giving is you don't find yourself in those spots as frequently. Even if you forget, because I think sometimes we forget the power of those groups of people. Um,
mhm,
the promise and the goal of recurring giving is that it might be fewer, lower dollar size gifts, but in mass, and it gets you through those hard seasons. It gives you that 90 plus strong retention rate most of times month over month that you're not worried about a churn, and you have like a dedicated amount of funds that you know can get you through ABC periods, and then that you can count on. And so that's something, that's one huge reason why I think it's important. Two, it is your pipeline for major gifts. And a
mhm,
lot of times people always say, I think I'm going to lose my major donors if I'm asking them to become a monthly donor. That's absolutely not true. A lot of times you might have somebody that would love to give you $5,000, but they can't at one time. But if they could split that over 12 months, would that work for them as an opportunity? And then on the flip side, if you see a monthly donor that's giving you $500 a month, that could be a reason to ask and say, hey, we have this other X thing going on. We'd love to sit down with you and have a deeper conversation about our mission and how you'd like to get further involved. And again, if that structure wasn't in place of the recurring giving, would that person have even given in the first place? Um, so I think those are like two main principles. And then I would say the last one that I say to everybody is to have a specific monthly giving program. It's not a checkbox on a donation form, although, yes, definitely have that like on your homepage, but have a specific monthly giving landing page with a story. That donation box is only monthly. There's no like very lack of room for donor confusion on those pages. That is a monthly giving program, but make sure that you are making it prominent, that it has a name, that it has a story, and that it has an impact.
Yeah, that's so good. I think what we've learned the most is that we've been growing that program for Money Collective, but it's so interesting because for the longest time, I mean, even before this call, I was talking about our trip that we just took at the beginning of this year. And it was to visit, monthly donors that support all of our programs that we do in Kenya, specifically even our boys program that I don't talk much about on this podcast. But then I had never crossed it over to Amani for the longest time. Amani Collective for a long time survived off of these kind of big unicorn type donations. And then we got a new kind of director of partnership in, and over the last year and a half have been building out this program. And it's been so beautiful and fun to celebrate like 3 to 5 new, we call our program we'd call our program SEED, which is supporting
I
economic
love it.
empowerment and development. And so when we have 3 people at $50, like to celebrate that versus always just being like, oh, look, we got another 10,000 or something. It's been really fun to celebrate those wins. And then to see our new kind of director come in and be able to build relationships and it not just be on me. And I think as an executive director too, and a founder, it's like finding up and training up your team or someone that can be that liaison too, I think is so important, because I think that was always the crux of burnout for me as well, as like, man, I want to be able to push into these relationships, but there's only so much time. And so to have someone to be able to do that. So I always tell her to go to your resources. I'm like, check out what she's doing this month, listen to her podcast, like keep learning all the things.
Well, and I would say like the biggest thing that you can do is talk about your program all the dang time. Like if you want, I think it's funny where people are like, my monthly giving program's not growing. And so I say, well, where are you talking about it? How often are you talking about it? And like, well, we did an initial push. And I was like, an initial push, one email, that's not going to cut it. Like this has to be continuous. Think about just how busy our lives are. You are on a crazy road trip with your kids. I am sure there are tons of emails that you miss. Like if somebody, like how would they find Jenny, right? Like they have to probably send you multiple emails or a text message, or they're going to slide on your Instagram feed and you're finally going to see them. Like you have to make sure that this program is top of mind for your donors, and one email is not going to do it. So talk about it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. So biggest advice right now is like, again, if you guys are coming into August and this whole month, we're going to have lots of different advice from good friends of ours. So I'm excited for you guys to hear from all the people this month. But biggest advice is to just start now, start with those relationships, start, pushing forward. But I want to kind of circle back to what we started this conversation with and spend a lot of our time on your book you have coming out and what it actually looks like for you as founders or as leaders to use your voice as a thought leader too. I think a lot of times we feel intimidated by maybe everybody out there, or maybe our expertise. We were off the mic, we were talking about how no one really took us seriously until we were an author or we had a degree or whatever it might be. Or a podcast. Exactly. The credibility. So let's talk about your journey as you've been going through it. It is like coming to the end and being able to launch and be able to share with the world. So talk a little bit about that journey, what you have coming up and what it's all about. And then we'll continue to talk about that journey.
You were honestly like such an inspiration seeing you come out with your book, and we can maybe talk about the differences of you self-published and I decided to do a hybrid publishing. And I think writing a book is really daunting. I think there's a stat out there that Allie Trowbridge owns the company Copper Books that I hybrid published through. And she shared with me a stat. It's like 80% plus of people want to write a book, but 1% actually do. And it's just this fear or intimidation of not being able to do it. And trust me, I get it. When I was told to have like 50,000 words and you're sitting on a blank open Google Doc, you're like, what in the world? But if I can do it, literally anybody can do it. To give you context of maybe how crazy I am, I wrote the book in 4 weeks. Now it is a framework that I have been teaching, right? This is stuff that's like in my brain. And actually, once I started to write the actual like 5-step framework chapters first, I wrote those from the structure, and then I wrote the beginning and the end after it was done. It actually flowed really fast. Like getting to 35,000 words was a breeze. I don't know if you felt this way
Yeah.
in yours, where like some of them you're just going and you get into a creative flow and you're good. The beginning and the end were the hardest, and then the editing was really hard.
The editing is the roughest part. I worked with an editor, and she even kind of ghostwrited some of my chapters. I would send her audio because a lot of, if you read my book, in the different, like a lot of it sounds like I always tell people it's like I'm having coffee with you. It
Yes.
literally sounds like I'm talking to you the way I wrote it, because a lot of it literally I recorded and sent someone to kind of like write it out and I edited it from there because my mind was so like cluttered. But I will say there are some stories. I just woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to write this story. I remember the story where I wrote about me going to the village after my friend had committed suicide. And then I was driving back down the village and then someone's fell and her leg bone was coming out of her
Yes.
leg. Like it was just like, oh wow, that was written at like 2 a.m. and it just like flowed out of me and it like barely was edited because it was just like, and so it's so interesting as a writer, like just letting like identifying yourself as a writer and then letting some of those stories flow. And then there were some that were just really hard. And then there was random stories I didn't even put in the book because they were funny and they were random that I wrote out, but I was like, this fits nowhere. Like
This
this
fits nowhere.
doesn't go
Yeah.
anywhere in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they're just sitting, floating in a Google, doc somewhere. But I feel you. I think starting is daunting. I was mentored by Bob Goff for a bit, and one of his biggest advice to me, I remember this was in 2021 when I had kind of first started brainstorming about it, but he was like, Jenny, you just have to like start. And he said, just try to work in 120 words at a time. Like a chapter can be 3 stories of 120 words or 3 sections of
Oh, that's
120,
interesting.
words. And so to kind of like view it as that. But I think in writing, whether you're coached on it or whatnot, I think it's just, again, starting and knowing. I love that you talked about, you wrote what you're really like, what like what you're really good
Yeah.
at, framework. And then you figure out the flow from it, because my book entirely like completely changed the order of
Same.
it.
Me
It
too.
originally wasn't even in chronological order in the way that I finally put the book in. It was like such a random mix because I felt like it sounded better. Then I had 2 of my closest friends read it because I felt like after the editing, I wanted someone I trusted to read it
Yeah.
first. And they're like, you have to change the order all around. So like people will not follow. So it was like really good to get feedback. But I think just writing, and it doesn't have to start in that way. And I'm glad you did
Yeah.
that. Like, but how was it? I'm curious. I'm curious how was that with just like sitting there and then having, okay, I did all the framework stuff and then having to be like, okay, this is the beginning. Like
The beginning, it was
how did
really
that feel?
hard. The beginning was a personal story, and actually, it was really long. And my publisher was like, We need to cut some of this out." It was just like not needed extra information to get to the point of
Yeah.
what I was trying to make. And I think also, like, listener, if you're a nonprofit leader, social impact leader, I think the decision for me about writing a book, and I think this gets also highlighted very often in the bookmaking space, which was not Jenny nor I's intention, is like New York Times bestseller. Like, that does
Mhm.
not have to be your desire either. I think mine was, I had this information I've been sharing. It's working. I want to share it in mass. I love speaking and being on a stage, and being an author provides that level of credibility to help with getting booked on stages, which also is a revenue driver for my business and what I love to do. Um, I think also I was just sharing with Jenny, like before we hit record, was that Allie, my publisher, also said like this wonderful thing on a podcast episode when I was talking to her about, imagine an introduction to somebody, right? Instead of handing them your business card, you're handing them your book, and they are truly getting to know you. And there are so many causes or things in the world that I have learned because I've read a book, and how much more invested I am in that mission because of a 200, 300 page book that you're not going to get in a 40-minute keynote, a podcast
Mhm.
episode, a website. Like, you're just not. So if you have, which you do, an incredible story to share about the work that you're doing, get it out there. And like, you can either go the self-publishing route. I I'll share why I went hybrid, because I
Mhm.
felt like there was I needed accountability. Like, I needed somebody on my butt to get this done, because I have a monthly giving summit that I wanted it to tie into coming up in September. And so I knew I was going to have a hard deadline. and I needed somebody to like be there to help me get it done. And then there was a lot about the business of a book that I didn't understand, like the ISBN barcode and like the uploads and the trim size and the format and just like the cover design, and nor like praise you for figuring all that out. I was like, I don't have the time. I could try and figure it out. I'm sure I could YouTube a bunch of things. And I was also looking at mix match, like hiring individual consultants to do certain things, like an editor, the designer. And I was just like, why am I going to try and project manage all those people? So if you're someone like me, where you are a procrastinator, if you have lack of time, I have a 15-month-old now. So at the time of starting this, she was like less than a year, and just don't want to do it all by yourself. Like, it's 1000% worth it. The difference between a publisher, a hybrid, and a self is a publisher you don't pay for, but they are taking a very high percentage of your book fees. Usually until you hit like a mass quantity number of books. And then it's also like in perpetuity. And they own the rights. So you have to like buy yourself out if you ever want to do that. And I don't know, that just seems really messy. I'm not a celebrity. I'm not going to get like a six-figure like payment, or shoot, I probably wouldn't even get like a $5,000 payment for my book in advance. So hybrid, you pay the publisher to help you do all the things. So my publisher handles the distribution. They're handling like the uploads to Amazon and Barnes and Noble online and all those things. They set me up with a designer and the interior and the editor, the developmental editor, the proofreading editor. They know all those people. They also have like audiobook people. So I paid a lump sum, and then they do take $1 per book moving forward, but it's a very low, versus the publisher, I think, is like often 70-80% of the fee. And then obviously self, you get all of the earnings from it, but then you're doing it all yourself, which props, girl, or you hire people out, third party.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I'll explain a little bit of the self and won't spend a lot of time on it. I think at the end of the day, it's what Dana and I want to encourage you guys in is that I'm glad you shared that quote. I was going to be like, share the quote, because I think at the end of the day, I did my book tour. I decided to do a really cool month book tour last year. And it was super fun. And I got to connect with so many people all over the United States. And I did it on a tiny, tiny budget. I actually put a course together of how to do like an event book tour, because we had like a 6-figure book tour laid out for a sponsor, and we ended up not getting that sponsor. And so then I did it on like 5,000 or less. And a lot of the travel was all covered by donor miles and people just wanting us to like, get around and share the story. But what I learned is every person after that, it was just something that I could, when people would ask what my story is, I would give them my elevator pitch and be like, well, let me send you my book, or I'll send you the link if you want to get it. And I think exactly that. I have had so many, I even just received an email 2 days ago about a donor that has been with me for about 5 years now. And he read the book. And he's like, I just finished your book and I didn't know 70% of everything that and he just shared it was just like, I'm words of affirmation, girl. So it was just like tons of love and was like, kind of, I'm with you to the end. Like, it was just like this, like,
amazing.
And he was already very committed, but it was just like, wow, like I just didn't even realize. So I think that the strength of sharing that, I've had a lot of friends send me their books who run organizations I highly, highly respect and love. And then when I read again their story and can relate. And then also I'm just like, wow, I just feel again so much more invested in what you're doing. So I think that advice alone is, if you do run an organization, if you're committed to that, if you're a founder, a leader, a thought leader, what in the space of raising funds for an amazing cause, write it down. And it doesn't have to be a 50,000 book manuscript. It can be super small, and it can be just, something that is of your words. So I went self-publishing mainly because I have a team. And so don't look at me. I'm going to give all credit to Allison. She's my director of strategy and operations in the States. And she figured out the ISBN. I actually have in the mail when it came from like the literal, like federal library of the United States, like thing. And I was like, whoa, we did this like by ourselves. I have no idea what she did. But yes, the ISBN number, all of that. So there is a lot that you have to do. And at the end of the day, you do have to invest if you're writing a book. Like we still went through a
Yes.
printer and different things. And then my mom has been selling printing for over 30 years. So we partner
Oh,
with her in
cool.
different ways. So like really cool stuff. So I think no matter if you're self-publishing or hybrid or going with a publisher, I think it's the
Yeah.
matter of just get your words out. I will say if you do find a traditional publisher and you have that route, really awesome if you want to go that route. Just know the main reason I had proposed to several publishers and we're in conversations. And the reason why I turned those down as well is because of timing. Like similar to you, where you're
Yes.
like, I knew I wanted to get my story out and my book out now because I have this summit. I
Yes.
just had this inkling and this push in my heart that I was like, 2023 is when my story needs to be heard. Like we're celebrating our 10 years at Amani.
A
I
lot of
wanted it
times
to
it's
launch
like
the same
8,
time. Yeah.
9, 10 months. It's
Yeah.
published
More
in
than it normally they say it's a 2-year turn. So like when you're
oh, wow.
writing and publishing, like most people who are consistent, authors, I mean, they're writing their next book now. You're not going to see it till like 2026. So it's like you have to think,
Yeah.
in that type of cycle. And so
I
if
like
you're
to be a
like,
little faster, which I also want to like
me
dive
too,
into
we're very
something that you mentioned,
yeah.
which I think is also a really big opportunity for nonprofit leaders is that go-to market strategy with a book tour in partnership. So I visited Kendra Scott, if people are familiar, is an incredible female entrepreneur. She's a billion-dollar business. She's been on Shark Tank, and she has she started with $500 selling her jewelry, and she's always had giving back in the DNA of the organization, and specifically giving back to female entrepreneurs. And I visited my other friend, not to be confused with Kendra, but my other friend Kendra had a book launch at her store here in Alpharetta. I live in just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And I went to go support her, and they were doing her book signing at the Kendra Scott location. And I was like, this is so cool. And they recorded a podcast there, and they call it like Sips and Sweets. And their head of marketing and philanthropy happened to be there. And so, of course, I approached her and we got into conversation all about how they do give back events all throughout the country, and they give 20% back to the nonprofit. And I was like, hold up. I was like, this could be a super cool book tour opportunity. And
Yeah.
so where I would host at locations, I would pick a local nonprofit. 20% would be given back. I'll give away like books. I'll do some book signings. The nonprofit will get to explain what they do and invite their people. So it's like a fun event for everybody. And then the Amanda Young, the marketing and
Yeah.
philanthropy manager that I met with, is now a panelist for my summit. We're doing the book tour, and she's been on the Missions to Movements, my podcast. And so it gives you this additional asset that you can use in your corporate partnership conversations, is why I say this. So if you have existing partners, twofold, I would say jump on a phone call with them and say, if you're in the process of thinking about writing a book, I would love to partner with you on a book tour. What could this look like? B, we have this monthly giving program. Do you do lunch and learns where I can come talk about, like, and this could actually be a segue to my book and the monthly giving program, right? Do you do employee give back? Is there room in your newsletters? Like, there's so many different ways to create those like value aligned partnerships to amplify your monthly giving, and then also strategically the growth and reach of a published book.
Mhm. Yeah. And I would also say, if this is all really daunting conversation, to just start simple. I think we over complicate even like newsletters or what that can look like, right? Just in what we're sharing our impacts. And so start with like just start writing and getting your words out there and your stories out there and what you can share. I know some people they're in
Yeah.
impact in places where maybe you can't share all your stories, but if you have a blog or if you have something where you can share
LinkedIn.
intimately with people, LinkedIn, exactly. Start sharing your authentic side of the story versus always maybe sharing just like numbers of what you're doing. Because I think we're
Yes.
human. So we relate to human emotion and stories. And I think that was, you've seen, our impact reports and things we do. And there's some of it, I mean, very much is very standardized, I guess, but I always do a letter from the founder in the beginning. And it's just me again talking to you and like really heartfelt. And I think that's what people crave and donors crave. Yes, they love the like cool, the impact story of who you're impacting, but also like, what is your experience, especially if you're on the ground in the community and doing, what you're doing. I think just sharing those like real-time things is always really good. But yes. And then write a book. We want to read it. So we want to share it.
Just
Just
saying
do that.
I think we both were very scrappy in different ways of like
Yes,
putting
so
it
it's good.
together and making it work. So like you do not have to be a super polished
No.
like
Well,
person.
I told you how mine started, right? Mine was just journal entries.
Yes.
Yeah.
Start
Like
there.
I was like in a burnout stage. So I just started writing in a journal and to remind me of my why. So I'd write all these personal stories. And then when I was partnered with Bob Goff that year, and he was like, you need to share like what's in this journal. And I was like, well, maybe. And then like put it out there. So
So
yeah, start
cool.
scrappy. Just what do you have around? Because I'm sure whatever you've written in the past, like you could put together and make
Yeah.
it make sense. But
Yes.
what I want to kind of end our time here, and just as you know, I always end this podcast with one last thing to live by. So I want you to give some cool quote or something from you of encouragement for our people as they go into this month and the rest of the year. So think of that for a little bit. But I do want you guys to be aware. Dana's book is launching next week. So stay tuned for that. We'll have stuff in the show notes. She also has it's in September, right? Your monthly giving summit. So we'll make
Yes.
sure we link
The
the
5th
monthly
and the
giving
6th.
summit, and people, the 5th and the 6th of September. Can people sign up now till when?
Oh yeah.
Till like the day of?
Yep. It's free.
Okay. If you have never heard from this woman, you need to, or have been to anything a part of what she organizes, you need to be there because it is amazing. And I am going to be sending my director of partnership. She has no idea yet, but I'm signing her up so that she's going to be there.
Yay.
Virtually. She's going to be there. And yeah, so check out the show notes, check out all that, be connected. If you guys really have been struggling with messaging, what that looks like with a monthly giving program, what that even means to even explore, you mentioned this in your intro about ads behind that. That's something that I've always been hesitant about, and I've grown to love over the years of what that looks like as a nonprofit, because running a product-based business, we do that all the time, but what does that look like on the nonprofit side? So
Yep.
all of that, guys, reach out. Do you have any like connection? Can you tell people how they can reach you? Do you have a connection calls? Like, what does that look like if people want more information? Where's
Absolutely.
the
So
best?
I'd say LinkedIn is the best. Just search Dana Snyder, or positiveequation.com is the home base for everything.
Okay, perfect. I always want to say your like maiden name because that's what I meant, but you're right, Snyder. Awesome. Okay, so now I've given you like a millisecond to think about it, but what is one last thing to live by that our listeners can be encouraged throughout this week?
I think I'm just going to make it super short and simple. And I'm going to say to live by curiosity. Just be like so hungry for curiosity and growth. And I think if we have that mindset, there's always like a positive element for that growth.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. I think when we're closed off or kind of stagnant, or if you feel like you're stagnant, it's probably because somewhere you have a bottleneck to that curiosity. So to kind of look into that, that is awesome. Well, thank you so much for starting this month off, because this is going to be a great month for all of our just nonprofit leaders out there and philanthropists and all those people that have to raise a lot of money like we do.
Always
So,
a good time chatting with you. I love it. I wish we could do it more.
I know. Well, thank you everybody for listening this week. And as always, Moxie on.